I'm talking about public transport today, something which is of high interest to every one of you, isn't it? Who came here using the subway or the S-Bahn, as we call it here in Munich? Okay, at least some people. Who enjoyed the ride? Oh! So you're going home and doing things like this, huh? So typically public transport is of low interest, and people think it's a must, and no one really likes it. This is why we're talking about autonomous cars. We are talking about autonomous whatever, but not subways, okay? However, I'd like to get you interested in the topic because if it's an increasingly important topic, not only for us in Munich, but for 2/3 of the global population. This is what the daily life of most of the people on this planet looks like. So daily commute, traveling 2 hours on a car or a completely inappropriate mode of transport is quite common. And it's getting worse. So if you look at urbanization, despite all of the working from home things and so forth, this is coming increasingly a burden for most of the people on this planet. And of course, if this is a problem, everyone's talking about solutions. And you've got people that have all kinds of crazy technology visions. Yeah, things like flying drones, autonomy minibuses, cable cars, robotaxis, and the like. Most people underestimate that there is not only a technology challenge, but there is a practicality challenge to those. How many people travel into Munich on a daily basis, commute into Munich? Do you have an idea? Make a guess.
500,000.
Almost 1 million people. 1 million people daily commute into Munich. Number is probably a bit high. In London, it's almost 5 million every day. Imagine those people would use flying drones. Do you have an idea what the sky would look like? Okay, so technology is nice, but there's a practicality issue. And I'd like to pinpoint you on one thing which is often undervalued, which is the topic of capacity. So how many people can I actually transport in a given mode of transport? Okay? And there is a distinction. It's the blue area and it's the red area. And this distinction is driven by the infrastructure. We talked about the infrastructure a minute ago. So there's this cross line that says if you're operating on a shared infrastructure, like a road outside, where cars, buses, trucks, bicycles share the infrastructure, the capacity of people you can provide is pretty limited. On a street like the one passing by this area, a so-called Landstraße, the capacity of a Landstraße is about 500 people per hour per lane. 500. We are talking about 1 million people. 500 per hour. Okay? On a German motorway, which is considered to be the best practice, it's 2,000 per hour per lane. Okay? So actually, to get the commuters in an hour, you need a 500-lane motorway parallel. Okay, so that's the order of magnitude. So whatever we do in terms of minibuses, robotaxis, that's not a solution. Simply not a solution. A single subway line carries about 20,000 people. So to substitute a subway line with cars, you need a 10-lane motorway per direction. Okay? You can do that, then your city looks like Los Angeles or Shanghai. Do we want that? No. This is why even in the 21st century, cities are not intrigued by this, but they're intrigued by rail. So even in the 21st century, Munich is a best-in-class example, we still build subway lines in the 21st century. A technology that's 150 years old. Actually, no one really likes it, particularly in peak hours. And now comes the fun part. We all have to pay for it. Do you have an idea on the amount of money we spend on public transport? This is why you should get interested in the topic. And I'm deliberately avoiding the Munich discussion now, for obvious reasons. Let's take another city. We're working a lot in London. If you buy a ticket on the London Tube, the London subway is called a tube, yeah? The amount of money you spend covers about 20% of the cost of your ride. And I'm not talking about building the system. That's 100% taxpayers' money. 20% from the operational cost. 80% is subsidies. taxpayers' money. Do you have an idea on how much that is for the City of London on an annual basis? 10 billion pounds every year. 10 billion. Okay? That's more than all hospitals, kindergartens and schools combined. It's the largest portion in the city's budget. And that's equally applicable for London, for Paris, for New York, for any major city in this planet. And we all pay for this. Okay? Okay, do you like it? So why doesn't anyone talk about it? Okay, we do. What we can provide is, we can provide similar levels of capacity as a subway does, but at a fraction of the cost without the need for subsidies. So we can wipe that portion of the budget completely out. This is what Drommers does. And how we do it, it's probably, I move to the second thing. It's actually we operate on dedicated infrastructure like a subway does. So we have a dedicated lane where we operate on. But the vehicles are much smaller. It's actually small vehicles, basically a subway for yourself, and probably 3 people sharing the subway with you, so to speak, if you think of the subway analogon. Small electrically powered vehicle, 1 meter wide, 220 long, fully autonomous, electrically powered, 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steering. And because we're talking about mobility, we're not talking about passenger mobility, but we're talking about freight at the same point in time. We're currently building a second subway tunnel here in Munich that doesn't even think of transporting goods because the subway system is not suited for transporting goods. How crazy can you be in the 21st century to build a system that doesn't take care of freight? 30% of all of the freight in a city is freight, or transport is freight. Okay. Of course, it's barrier-free and everything else. And it has a couple of other things because we are 21st century, so it's climate neutral, not only in terms of CO2, but also in terms of microparticles. We've got special tires where the microparticles emitted by the tires are biodegradable. It's actually feasible today. Okay. We don't have surface and soil sealing and so forth. And the key thing, it's no subsidy required. Okay, so even cities that can't afford transport at this point in time can use systems of this kind. And no surprise, we've got numerous requests all around the globe, basically more all around the globe than in Germany. Germany is well equipped in developing leading edge technology. We are having difficulties in applying these technologies in Germany. Okay? And I can talk about that for hours, but I won't. The infrastructure we need is actually very lightweight. It's something which we would probably consider as being highways for bikes. So that's the kind of infrastructure we need, as opposed to a classical subway tunnel. And if you think of best practice examples in the world in terms of new mobility, they exactly build that kind of infrastructure. Now, so everything's all good. We're talking about satellites now. Why would you talk about satellite communication in an urban environment? Because there's no coverage issues apparently in Munich, or there shouldn't be. But there's a use case that's of particular importance for us, which is revitalizing abandoned rail tracks. So if you think of rail, by the way, there's a rail track outside that has not been used for the last 20 years. Now, we could easily reinstall mobility services on those rail tracks. You might argue, why would you care about rail tracks? German rail has basically shut down 30% of their network over the last 20 years. 30%. So a lot of the areas in Germany are basically not served by public transport. And by the way, issuing a 49 euro ticket doesn't solve that. Okay? Just because you've got a ticket, if there's no service. Okay? So rather thinking about dumping a non-existent product in terms of pricing, you should probably better think about a different product. And this is what we do. And actually, this means that a couple of million people in Germany don't have any public transportation services so far. So we can use Drommers for reinstalling services at a fraction of the cost as opposed to rail. And here comes the point. Those areas are typically somewhat remote. And as you've heard numerous times this morning, there's coverage issues. Okay? So even if we aspire to reinstall mobility services on those abandoned railroads, we've got difficulties in having mobile coverage. Therefore, we need a solution that provides this kind of coverage, and for different reasons. For operational reasons, we talked about this morning, or we heard people talking about it. And we need some backup solutions for operational safety and security. We need seamless handover between the various topics and so forth. Okay? To give you an idea on the degree of cost efficiency of DROMOS as opposed to a classical rail system, let me just share a probably a bit complex chart. And I'm starting with building the system first. How much is a kilometer of railway tracks if you build them anew? You've got greenfield, 1 kilometer railway. How much is that? Any idea? About 30 million euros. Okay? How much is the tunnel per kilometer? Up to 1 billion. Okay? So it's unbelievable figures. A kilometer of DROMOS infrastructure is 300,000 euros. So we're 2 orders of magnitude cheaper. 2 orders, a factor of 100. So we're not talking about 20% cheaper. So that's 2 orders of magnitude. That's a step change, a huge step change. And that actually makes projects feasible that were not feasible in the past. Okay? So we have to solve this in order to make it happen. And this is where some special technology comes into place that we, DROMOS, have developed in order to cope with those. Remember in the discussion this morning, we were talking about 3G, GSMR in rail and so forth, low bandwidth, difficulties in latency and the spot topics and so forth. I don't want to kind of repeat all of that. So you need a solution that is actually able to deal with the problem of having low bandwidth and having issues in latency. So the DROMOS system, for example, does not require vehicle-to-vehicle communication, okay? Which actually gives you a lot of savings in bandwidth. Again, I'm being the CTO, I have some kind of, I like facts. I'm not a marketing person, I like facts. If you have 100 vehicles traveling around, the number of communication channels between those 100 vehicles, how large is that figure? Do you have an idea? If you've got 100 vehicles, you've got more communication channels than atoms in the universe. Okay? So people tend to ignore facts. Yeah. So if you have vehicle-to-vehicle communication, you easily run out of bandwidth, of course, regardless of how powerful your technology is. Okay? So we have come up with a solution that does not require vehicle-to-vehicle communication, which has another benefit of not having to care about cybersecurity issues in vehicle-to-vehicle communication. And we have a system that allows us to have operational safety, security, even without coverage for a specific portion of time. So when we learned about the interruption of the satellite signal because of the catenary, the overhead wire for power transmission, that doesn't bother us at all. And as a matter of fact, we're taking advantage of regulatory approval schemes that are existing for rail, autonomous rail. Most of us are talking about autonomous vehicles in cars. And you heard these level 4, level 5 or whatever kind of things being out, let's say 5 years, 10 years or whatever. Autonomous rail exists for 30 years. There's an autonomous subway going through the Nuremberg or to the Nuremberg airport, and that's existing for 20 years now. Fully autonomous. We take advantage of that regulatory framework, and that gives us an enormous amount of flexibility also in terms of technology challenges. Now, what we're doing is we're now building the first of these systems, as I said before, unfortunately not in Germany, but in the UK. And the first city that will adopt that kind of topic is Cambridge in the UK. So we're building the first system over there. And we will reinstall mobility services on railroads, again, most likely, unfortunately, in the UK and not in Germany. And nevertheless, we would like this forum and part of the people we hear to actually get the technology up and running to actually make that happen, even though the first application area will be in the UK. And what we are up to is now implementing all of those things into the classical regulatory approval protocol. We heard about GSMR this morning. And of course, we're looking for suppliers for the various technologies to be delivered in the vehicles. This is why I asked about the cost of the onboard units and so forth. So anyone who is interested to get going and actually make this happen is highly welcome to talk to me after the call. Thank you very much.